I was shopping for a domain recently when I noticed, and not for the first time, that .io domains are way more expensive than the typical .com, .net, or even .horse. And it got me wondering what the whole .io thing was about anyway. It's everywhere you go on the web these days. But what I was expecting to be just a minor tangent turned out to be a rabbit hole the size of Montana, so buckle up because this one's a doozy, folks. Let's take a trip back to 2010. Everyone and their literal grandmother has been surfing the web for 2 decades already and is at least vaguely familiar with top-level domains, or TLDs, even if they don't know the term. They're the little dangly bits at the end of every URL. By this point, all the best .coms have been snatched up by big companies and squatters, and .nets are an immediate tip-off to hip young millennials that you're definitely at least 100 years old and probably some kind of narc. Meanwhile, your tech startup Sprongus is popping off. You have a vague but revolutionary idea that's going to completely disrupt the middleware as a service orchestration analytics space. And no one knows you're just 2 dudes and a duck that somehow tapped out Hello World in Python once while pecking crumbs out of a mechanical keyboard. So the VC cash is flowing like free LaCroix at a WeWork. But you realize that you don't even have a domain yet, and it turns out that some asshole has been squatting on the .com since before you were born, just waiting for this moment to stiff you. But you won't give him the satisfaction. You're a genius wunderkind tech founder who once ran Doom on a TI-83 just to impress your Neopets Guild forum, and you know that there are plenty of domains out there besides .com. Besides, you're trying to position yourself as someone who not only knows that other TLDs exist, but can use an unusual one to signal to those in the know that you get it. That not only are you in on the meme, that you knew about it 2 months ago when it was just an obscure Twitter post and didn't even think it was that funny. Enter .io, the perfect "we're a tech company for tech people" domain. Somehow, those 2 letters uttered sequentially are enough to give anyone who's ever owned an Arduino or knows how to use a command line instant goosebumps. The input-output association hits like a pheromone for devs and engineers. You see that Sprongus.io is available and you pause for a moment. You say it to yourself quietly and feel an instant magical thrum deep in your nerd soul. A profound cosmic resonance with whatever innate quality drives one to stay up until 2 a.m. recompiling the Linux kernel just to shave 20 milliseconds off your latency in Vim. You snatch it up without another thought. Stepping back into the present, I was curious what the popularity timelines for .io and other alt TLDs actually looked like, so I rolled up my sleeves and got scraping. I picked a set of TLDs that I was interested in and sampled about 1,000 domain names for each of them from Cisco's list of the 1 million most popular domains. Then I scraped for old SSL certificates and whois entries to try to gauge when each domain had first started being used. 40 hours later, I was blessed with this absolute gem of a dataset. And when I plotted it out, some legit trend signals jumped right off the screen. Like this huge spike in .co around 2010 when it first became widely available after being hyped up as the new .com. And another hype bubble around .me in 2007 for its own popular debut. And it's interesting just how much the popularity of alt TLDs in general has exploded since around 2010, compared to the mainstream TLDs like .com, .net, and .org. Honestly, I could talk about this chart for an hour. The whole thing's on GitHub for any data nerds out there who want to dig into it. But for now, let's zoom in on our friend .io. Let's revisit the question of why .ios are so frickin' expensive first. Our timeline shows that by 2015, .io was pretty much the archduke of alt TLDs. So it would be easy to just say, well, of course, demand just drove prices through the roof, and call it a day. But I wanted to dig deeper. I hopped in the Wayback Machine for some more time travel to try to get an idea of what a .io actually costed around 2008, before it became the hottest thing on the block. So I hit up TLDlist.com, but the oldest snapshot there was from 2015, and all I really learned is that .ios have stayed in the same $30 to $50 range for the last 10 years. Finally, I ended up on the actual .io domain registry page from 2007, which boasted immediate activation of a brand new .io domain at the low price of $100 a year. And just like that, any notions I had that maybe .io was some scrappy rags to riches story went up in smoke. From the prestigious early price tag and the language used on the registry's awesomely dated webpage, it's clear that .io has been positioned as premium goods from the beginning. The Gucci of TLDs. The average .io probably only dropped in price from an arm and a leg to a little steep for the average Joe hacker due to improvements in domain provisioning protocols and the volume pricing deals they enabled. Behind the scenes of the snappy GoDaddy registrar-mediated experience, actually registering a domain in a registry system was a special kind of pain in the 90s and aughts. Immediate activation usually meant as soon as some humans can receive your fax or email template and manually key it into the zone file. Fully online workflows began to roll out starting in 1999, but it was mostly the normie TLDs that were the first to adopt. .io, on the other hand, was handcrafted, artisanal. Their website shows us that the registry was focused on a direct-to-consumer business model and wasn't overly concerned with integrating with registrars and moving domains at scale. That's probably why it barely shows up in popularity data before 2008, despite having been around since the late 90s. Most people had no idea it even existed. So let's try to figure out how this dark horse became such a breakout success. To get a handle on the story our trend line is telling us, I've divided the life of .io into 3 distinct eras. We see that .io went from relative obscurity before 2009 to near parity with the normie TLDs around 2012. A slow but steady uptick in the adoption of .io was underway. This wasn't some flash-in-the-pan hype bubble. This was the Sprongus Era. New VC-fueled cloud-based startups sprouted up like little caffeine-addicted hackathoning weeds across Silicon Valley so fast that their founders barely had time to drop out of Stanford. And the techie appeal and virtual Wild West of unclaimed .ios at this time likely led to its stealthy but undeniable rise during this era. CodePen.io, Sentry.io, and Segment.io were some developer-centric .ios that launched during this time and went on to become massively influential, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Even GitHub, arguably the most dev-focused company ever, was one of the first to lean in. They registered Atom.io for their IDE project Atom in 2010 and their URL shortener Git.io in 2011. Devs flocked to .io as its off-the-charts tech mojo made it the default badge of legitimacy for anything too cool for a .com. Around 2013, .io reached an inflection point, surging from roughly neck and neck with .com to doubling its sales in 2015. This was .io's golden age, and the startups, having previously started coming, had yet to stop coming. .io's influence spread beyond the more hardcore tech bubbles to find appeal among startups building services even your literal grandmother might be interested in, like Grammarly.io. And the flood of VC cash into Silicon Valley only intensified, fueling the startup gold rush. Launching on .io became a shorthand signal to investors that you weren't just another wannabe unicorn. You were a genuine tech wizard who could make them richer than God. So of course I have to mention crypto. Just saying the word blockchain 3 times in 2017 could summon seed funding like, well, you get where I'm going with that. NFT, DeFi, ICO, you name it. If you knew what any of those meant, then you were already well familiar with .io. The whole Web3 thing gave off this renegade cyberpunk aura that fit .io like a tailored glove. Meanwhile, with the introduction of affordable cloud hosting, putting your wild side project out there to the masses became as easy as git push. To young budding developers who were exposed to .io during their formative years, .io wasn't so much a tech flex as just another meme. The browser game Agar.io was released in 2015 to much ado, and other indie browser games like Slither.io and Deep.io soon followed. Ask anyone under 30 today to name a .io, and odds are that these 3 games cover a majority of the responses. But the cloud wasn't the only thing that was blowing up. Behind the scenes, this era laid the groundwork for an even more disruptive tech to be built. Or should I say trained? Now this graph is great, but it's missing a couple things. If we extend our timeline a little bit, we see that .io appears to hit a rough patch between 2018 and 2021. But why? Well, this might have something to do with it. We've reached the identity crisis era. While some spent the 2010s teaching computers to write JSON, others were teaching them to write poetry. TensorFlow and PyTorch hit the scene in 2015 and 2016 and turned neural nets from PhD toys into weekend projects, firing the starting gun for a revolution the world didn't see coming. Massive strides in deep learning and artificial intelligence rolled out one after another, and a new 2-letter TLD stepped into the limelight. .ai. Google DeepMind's AlphaGo beat 18-time world champion Lee Sedol at Go in 2016, and a couple years later, a little research paper called Attention is All You Need introduced a new deep learning architecture called the Transformer. You know, the T and, well, we'll get to that in a sec. The whole time, deep learning models quietly crept into every corner of our lives, and .ai crept into .io's turf. 5 years after .io's meteoric rise, .ai came along and copy-pasted the same popularity curve, only steeper. By 2018, the two were rubbing shoulders and trading some serious side-eye. And it's safe to say that they were competing for the same market. The late 2010s and early 2020s saw every hot new dev tool, SaaS product, or scrappy side project having to decide, are we a .io or a .ai? Then in 2022, OpenAI dropped a 10 megaton bomb on the world named ChatGPT, and it landed squarely on .io's head. By the following year, .ai domain sales had increased by 156%, venture decks swapped API first for AI first, and resellers started moving .ais with six-figure price tags. And .io? Well, you know that scene in Toy Story where Woody watches Andy's room transform into Buzz Lightyear's command center? Yeah, you get it. So it looks like the spotlight has shifted for now. But let's at least give .io its flowers and take a look at where it came from in the first place. You see, .io isn't just born out of a concentrated puddle of nerd riz. It's actually classified as a country code or CC TLD, a class of domains related to specific places like .fr for France, .jp for Japan, .ca for Canada, and so on. Some CC TLDs also just happen to sound like they refer to things that aren't countries. .tv, for example, is the CCTLD for the country of Tuvalu, but it also coincidentally just happens to have a strong association with our old friend, the television. In fact, all two-letter TLDs are CCTLDs, per ICANN regulations. Remember .co and .me from earlier? Well, those price bubbles were the direct result of the Colombian and Montenegrin governments, respectively, deciding to let outside interests start using their country's designated cyberspace for profit. And of course that rascal .ai is another prime example, whose cachet doesn't stem from its origins in the island nation of Anguilla. So now you might be wondering why Jupiter's second smallest moon gets its own domain, while Phobos, the cutest moon in the solar system, doesn't even get its own emoji on Slack. Well, it turns out that .io actually belongs to a little entity known as the British Indian Ocean Territories, which I will henceforth be calling BIOT, because it is a mouthful. And now you're definitely wondering, well, where the hell is that? As you should, because the BIOT is a collection of tiny, remote atolls out in, you guessed it, the middle of the Indian Ocean. And now if you're wondering what the deal with these specks of dirt and rock out in the middle of the ocean is, and if there's some eccentric billionaire living alone on an island there, raking in the profits from the .io boom while sipping a Mai Tai from their veranda overlooking the ocean as an army of contractors adds another tiki lounge to the sprawling doomsday bunker complex under their mansion, so was I. Well, it turns out the answer is wrapped in layers of history that we'll need to go back in time again to unwrap. The BIOT was completely uninhabited right up until the late 18th century when some Europeans decided it was a shame for all the coconuts there to just be lying around, not being coconut oil. So they established some plantations on the Chagos archipelago, importing labor in the form of enslaved Africans and Malagasy people to work them. The British gained control of Chagos and nearby Mauritius in 1814, and slavery was abolished in 1833. But many of the formerly enslaved people stayed on the island as indentured laborers for generations. Over time, these communities melded into a Creole-speaking culture with their own distinct identity, the Chagossians. In 1965, the UK pulled another tricky colonizer move and decided to lease the islands to the Americans who wanted to establish a military base in the area. They took the Chagos and other surrounding islands previously considered lesser dependencies of Mauritius and established them as a separate dependent territory before Mauritius could gain its independence, hence the BIOT. Rather than share the islands, the US and UK jointly agreed that it would be better just to evict everyone there to avoid any complications that might arise from sharing space with a civilian population. And over the next decade, the entire Chagossian population was forcibly removed, mostly to Mauritius and Seychelles, where they faced extreme poverty and unemployment. A few decades later, .io domains started raking in cash, while the only population with any real connection to the BIOT has never seen a single dime of the profits. So who's actually holding the rake? Well, that would be a company called Internet Computer Bureau, or ICB, which was later acquired by Aphelios, which was itself later acquired by a company called Donuts, and then they were all acquired by a private equity firm called Ethos Capital and rolled up into a company called Identity Digital. And the UK government probably gets a cut too, right? Well, that's still unclear. Paul Kane, founder of ICB, has claimed multiple times that ICB makes payments to the UK government to run .io, but the government itself has always denied this. But as it turns out, this very year, on May 22, 2025, the UK government officially signed a deal to give Chagos back to Mauritius. Well, on paper anyway. They still get to keep the base for 99 years. But this means that Biot as an entity will become officially defunct. So what does this mean for our buddy.io? Once the territory transfer is finalized later this year, the ISO committee will review whether to keep or retire ISO code 3166-1IO. If they do retire it, then in the short term, that means anyone using a .io domain will be safe for at least 5 more years. After that, the registry that serves .io, ICB & Co., can petition ICANN to delay mandatory retirement of .io for up to 5 more years, but then, at least on paper, .io is slated to walk the green mile. But in reality, it's almost certainly not going to go down like that. As I've laid out already, .io is a juggernaut, and it's not just going to lay down and die. And even if it's been overshadowed by its rival .ai in recent years, .io has too much juice to be cut loose, and despite its questionable origins, I'll admit that I'm fully seduced. If ISO does retire IO, ICANN's baseline rule is that CCTLDs must be tied to ISO codes. The truth is that they're actually quite pragmatic about these things, and if a CCTLD is technically stable, responsibly managed, and popular, they'll likely continue to let it live on indefinitely in a semi-retired zombie state. Just ask anyone still using the Soviet Union's CCTLD.su. The thing that does change is that .io is no longer an asset of the British Crown. And since it's no longer propped up by UK sovereignty, that means ICB is no longer federally insulated from challenges to the use of .io. Also this year, Mauritius partnered with Identity Digital to run their official CCTLD.mu. Many see this as an opening move toward future revenue sharing or even redelegation talks. Meanwhile, the Chagos Refugees Group UK has previously brought up OECD human rights complaints against ID and stated their intent to petition ICANN for control of .io. .io generates about $40 million a year, and if ISO does decide to keep the code, Mauritius' claim becomes far stronger. Under ICANN's local nexus doctrine, it could request redelegation or a revenue share. So the future is still very much uncertain, but .io has the chance to pull off a truly epic rebrand here. Born out of shady geopolitical maneuvering and burdened by some truly ugly colonial baggage, if the Chagossians can finally get a slice of the pie, it could give .io a major ethical facelift. So I hope that satisfies your curiosity about this little corner of tech trivia. If I missed anything big, or you just want to share your favorite weird alt TLD, drop it in the comments. I've also dropped a few links in the description if you want to learn more about the Chagossians or help signal support for a fair revenue sharing deal. And of course, please like and subscribe.